So, you want to be a teacher. Well, that's great. The world needs more energetic and self-aware teachers like you. I see you have your BA and subject matter competency, your CPR and fingerprints taken, and have some great past experience in the classroom. But, are you aware of your personal implicit bias you are bringing to the classroom? You look confused, and that's okay. This is a relatively new prerequisite for classroom teaching. Oh, and you think you do not have any implicit biases? Yes, I thought you might say that. Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but you do. Every human being does. Let me kick it to Keith Payne, professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, for a little explanation.
Implicit bias is a side effect of normal cognitive processes. In other words, we always think with the aid of categories, and because of that, we engage in categorization. We also make generalizations from those categories. We connect our thoughts to associations from those categories. So just like if you're a kid learning about a new category of birds, as soon as you understand that this new animal is a bird, then you'll make certain generalizations, like that it has wings and it flies. Occasionally that will lead to errors, so they might miscategorize an ostrich or something, think it flies. At a cognitive level, it's basically the same process going on here. It's just that nobody gets hurt if you overgeneralize about an ostrich. But whenever it's social categories we're talking about, the same processes can lead to discriminatory behavior in which people are harmed.
Put simply, every human being is vulnerable to implicit biases and putting people into categories. And to connect this to teaching, a teacher has a lot of power. Your thoughts about your students can expand or impede your students' growth. In the 1960s, a Harvard professor, Robert Rosenthal, performed an experiment in a real classroom that found that if a teacher had a bias towards a student, for example, if a teacher believes a child's IQ is higher than another's, then that child's IQ will increase by the end of the year, and the other child's IQ will not. Whether it's gender or race, student preference or handwriting, any factor that causes a teacher to have higher expectations for some of their students and lower expectations for others is bound to create results to match. And this extends throughout the student's life. When teachers underestimate their students, it affects not just one student-teacher relationship, but the student's entire self-concept, as well as more tangible measures like their GPA. So, I assume you had no implicit bias training? I see. Well, no worries. That's what I'm here for. Let's start at the very beginning. Let's take a few of these infamous IAT quizzes from Harvard University and see what implicit biases exist in your smart little head. Let's see your results. Oh wow, look at all the internal biases you have. Good thing you did not jump right into teaching. Just kidding. Don't be ashamed. We all are shaped with unique personal experiences from our upbringing, communities, and culture that shape our internal biases. Experiments like the IAT are not perfect, but render pretty consistent results in America.
On average, Americans have a much harder time doing the version in which white names are paired with crime and black names are paired with safety. When we look at the behavior of people in these studies, it's all too easy to say shame on those biased people. But if implicit bias is really about side effects of ordinary cognition, the way we all think with the aid of categories, then it means that as long as we've got those categories, we're all vulnerable to those biases.
Humans have implicit biases about the race of another person, socioeconomic status, gender identity, and more. And implicit biases are so ingrained in us, they sometimes make no sense at all. Like this example of female-named hurricanes.
So hurricanes with female names kill more people. But the reason seems to be that whenever it's a female name, people don't evacuate. How much damage could something named Katrina do anyway?
And of course, the elephant in the room of racial bias that exists in our culture. One example explained by Tracy Benson, assistant professor of educational leadership at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte.
Black and brown drivers are, I think, 3 times more likely to be stopped by law enforcement than are white people. And there was an interesting study out of Chapel Hill that compared the rates of police stopping black and brown people during the day than at night. During the day, it was 4 times higher. At night, it was the same. So when you can see the driver, bias exists. When you can't see the driver, they look more for behaviors of drivers rather than the color of the occupant. And so that tells us how racial bias plays out.
In the rest of this video, we will touch upon common stereotypes that teachers may hold about their students so that we can be more aware of them ourselves and stop them before any action is taken. Let's start with low-income students. Relative poverty creates a mindset that the class structure impoverished people find themselves at the bottom of is of their own making and therefore justifiable. In Patty Norman's study, she introduces the term socioeconomical status blind, or SES blind, in which a teacher may be blind to the socioeconomic status of his or her students and ignore the fact that this status makes a difference in the classroom. The belief that money or socioeconomics does not matter, or all students have access to the same opportunities regardless of SES, mirrors colorblind ideology. Such thoughts about students might go through a teacher's head. If the parents are not involved in the classroom or the parent-teacher conferences, the student and their family do not care about education, when perhaps parents are working 2 jobs in order to make ends meet. The classroom is a closed space with a level playing field. A parent should help a child be more academically successful. Or outside expenses are not considered for extracurricular activities in the classroom and school culture. Here are 2 quotes from teachers in Patty Norman's study. Honestly, the kids here at this high socioeconomical status school know their basic needs are being taken care of. They don't worry about where their food is coming from. They don't worry if they have a home to go to. They don't worry about who, if anyone, will be at the house. Your students will come from differing levels of socioeconomic status, and yes, that matters. For example, students from low-income households tend to experience more adverse home experiences, and adverse childhood experiences prevent skills such as grit, perseverance, even patience from developing inside these children. And that is a disadvantage. Ignoring the socioeconomic status of your students results in unequal education. You must take this into account in your classroom. Minorities. Whiteness is the widespread belief that everyone has access to the same opportunities in the US without recognizing the privileges that certain groups maintain. Black students are historically disciplined more in the classroom. In fact, Keith mentions a study during the 2017 New York Stop and Frisk program in which data was collected of the random searches done by New York City police officers. Of the 11 and 12-year-olds stopped, 90% were African American. Black students are more likely to be concentrated in low-income schools. They are more likely to be put into low academic track classes. A teacher may think that they're being nice or easy on the child, that this would be good for the child to have them succeed in a lower level class, but actually this is a form of oppression by not teaching challenging curricula that other students are learning. Unconscious bias towards minorities is subtle and often hard to see, like with this example experiment Benson retells.
So let's talk about the assessment of student ability, which goes back to expectations. And what they did is they gave each counselor and each teacher a poorly written essay. They changed the name on the essay to either be a white sounding name or a black or brown sounding name, and asked them to grade it and then give comments on the poorly written essay. And what they found was when they thought the writer was white, they gave the essay a lower grade and a lot more comments. And when they thought the writer was black or brown, they gave the essay a higher grade and less comments. This is how low expectations manifest itself in the classroom. Teachers have lower expectations for black and brown students, like this substandard work is the best you can do. So you deserve an A for this. But you white students, you can do better. So you get a C and you get more comments. So we can see that if this is something that's unconscious in the classroom and goes on over time, and it's widespread, the achievement gap is not by accident, it's by design. It's something that unless you study and know the research, you will never ever look for it. But it could be at play in schools every day and in our classrooms.
We must demand critical thinking and high standards from our minority students and let them know that they are capable of more. A skilled minority person who is not also capable of critical analysis becomes the trainable, low-level functioning of the dominant society. Students with minority backgrounds are also battling common misconceptions and stereotypes of people who look like them in the media media and the larger society. The general notion in this country is that children who belong to stigmatized groups are less than their middle-class, lighter-skinned age mates. Children readily internalize these beliefs about themselves. Teachers have an important role to play here. They must not only make children aware of the brilliance in their blood, but also help children turn away any internalized negative societal view of their competence into compelling drive to demand any system attempting to regulate them to the bottom of society must instead recognize and celebrate their giftedness. Also, color blindness is not the answer. We must acknowledge that students experience the world differently based on their ethnicity. Race impacts students, and ignoring this will actually make things worse. Gender bias. Common internal biases exist about the behavior of boys and girls, and placing them basically into these gender boxes, which they have to either conform to or try to escape. Boys have less self-regulation than girls. Boys are detached from their studies. They are less attentive than their female peers. Boys are more active and aggressive. Some examples of internal biases against girls are that they're bossy, whereas a boy would be seen as advocating for himself. Girls are agreeable and more likely to exert effort in the classroom. Girls are rewarded for being quiet and following directions. And teachers are more likely to interrupt girls or not call on them when they ask a question. A strong bias that exists in our culture is that girls have less academic potential than males, especially in math and science roles. Other researchers have found that teachers' gender-biased perceptions of learners' math-related abilities contribute to female learners' negative math attitudes and could further perpetuate the shortage of women in math and science-related fields. As a teacher, we must acknowledge these gender stereotypes and biases that exist in our culture and maybe in ourselves, become aware of them and not to perpetuate them to exist for another generation. There are common biases about bilingual or multicultural learners. In our American society, there is a history of repressing bilingual and multicultural education. Traditional school knowledge, such as reading, math, and the 5-paragraph essay, are seen as the norm and most important knowledge, especially when standardized testing is prevalent in schools. A bilingual student could be seen as disadvantaged for not speaking the dominant English language. These learners are often held back or put into special education classes. Let us propose a different way of looking at this. A bilingual learner comes to school with a wealth of knowledge from their culture and background. We must work to preserve their native language and practice them with teachers who speak these languages, and take into account all aspects of a child's knowledge base, not just the normal academic knowledge that we deem important. For example, their problem-solving abilities, their wealth of culture knowledge, or critical thinking skills. Students may not show academic knowledge, but have strengths in different areas, such as street smarts, caretaking abilities, problem-solving, and advanced thinking, which these communities routinely possess.
It is often the case that for children who are from poor communities, critical thinking skills are basic. Those are the skills they come to us with. They are accustomed to being more independent. Often, they are familiar with real-life problems and how to solve them.
We must acknowledge the funds of knowledge that these students come to our classrooms with and see them as a strength. Teachers may have personal judgments of their students, and these judgments are very case by case. You have to have a self-reflective teaching practice in order to be aware of when you are placing one of your implicit biases on your students, and they can be very subtle and unnoticeable in your life because up until this time, this is how you operated and this is how you were treated. You have to be the brave one and break the patterns of implicit bias and not put that on the next generation. Some common examples of implicit bias could be if a student performed at a low level at the beginning of the year, you may
expect them to perform at a low level at the end of the year. Or something like, the student is always late. I'm not going to call on Richard anymore because he's always rude. Students will ask for help if they're struggling. Gary is fine with his low achievement. Treating a student with a physical disability as having a mental disability. Arlene is gay and must know a lot about the LGBT plus community. Or students of certain groups will have certain participatory styles, such as being loud or aggressive in group discussions. We also must check that academic knowledge is not the most important knowledge, and it is not okay to rank students based on grades. Believing that hard work and ability are all it takes for a student to succeed, where no, when a student succeeds, it's usually a support system at home and knowledge of the academic systems of our country. The most important part to take away from this video is to be aware of the implicit biases you hold and consistently be reflecting and checking on your actions and your thoughts about your students and the classroom that you lead. Constantly questioning yourself as a teacher almost scientifically. Why did I say that to this student? Why did I choose to stay on this topic? Where do most of my students come from? Is everyone represented in the curriculum that we're teaching? Is the curriculum that I'm teaching historically correct and anti-racist curriculum? It is an unending teacher journey to do the work to explore your implicit biases and share them and have the conversations that will help to eliminate the historically oppressive actions that our school system has seen. And hopefully this video motivates those types of conversations and motivates the change to start inside of yourself as a teacher.